very special guest, Hector Mujica, who is running for U.S. Senate against Ashley Moody. I just want to do a quick caveat that having a candidate here on the podcast does not mean that we support or endorse candidates. We don't do that until the primary election, and you do have many primary opponents.
That's true.
But we give candidates the opportunity to come and share their platforms equally. So, Hector, thank you so much for being here.
Laura, thank you for having me.
It is my great pleasure and honor, and I want to learn more about your campaign. So tell us, why now? What's your origin story?
Yeah. What possessed me to take this courageous step? Listen, first and foremost, a first-generation American and a proud Floridian, and someone that wholeheartedly believes that Florida has a history of greatness, and I am not one to sit on the sidelines and watch people write it off.
Right.
And that propelled me to take this courageous step to be running for U.S. Senate statewide in the state of Florida in this moment in time. I think there's a big impetus to the why now, right? Something that I think a lot about is we're living in a moment in time when there's a range of inflection points that are converging.
Yep.
There's an inflection point democratically. I don't have to spend a lot of time on that one, but
we can.
Are we still a nation of laws, or are we applying laws in constitutional matters like due process selectively? There is an inflection point socially and culturally. Do you and I see each other first and foremost as fellow Americans, as fully dignified human beings, or do we see each other as political enemies if we happen to fall on different sides of the political spectrum? There's an inflection point economically. Do we still believe in the promise and the concept of the American dream, or is that a relic of the past? And are we just going to quietly let that subside? And the world that I come from, right? I come from the tech sector, from the private sector. In my world, we're also acknowledging that there's a bit of a technological inflection point with artificial intelligence. And are we going to use this inflection point to open up more pathways to opportunity, or are we going to let it concentrate power and concentrate wealth even further? So to me, that created a big impetus to be able to jump into this race and into this moment in time when we're responding to such an influx of tipping points that are going to be so critical to the future of this nation.
Absolutely. And let me just say, a statewide race in Florida as a Democrat, that takes a lot of courage. So you did take a courageous step in doing this. And many people have said that there is no way a Democrat can win a statewide race. I think that maybe if we were talking a year ago, that might have felt more true. I personally completely disagree. I think that all those inflection points that you have mentioned are sitting heavy with Americans, with Floridians right now, and there is a moment to have this conversation and not throw up our hands and give up, right?
Listen, if one of the things that I heard often from people when I told them that I was thinking about jumping into this race was there's no path statewide in the state of Florida. One, I want to challenge that belief, because in as far and in as long as we continue to reiterate that belief, that is going to continue to be the case. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
100%.
Right? So we need to be taking the courageous step of challenging conventional wisdom and doing the hard work of rebuilding infrastructure across the state so that we have a tangible shot at being able to bring some balance back into the state of Florida. One. Two, I do think, there's this conventional wisdom that Florida's too far gone, that Florida's too deep red. And I would argue that's not necessarily the case. I think Floridians are fragmented and exhausted, right? I think they're just so tired of the noise and the rage baiting and the fear mongering that many of them are just saying, hey, this whole political thing is not for me. I'm just going to sit out and I'm just going to let it play out however it needs to play out. And I think those are the folks that we need to be talking to. We need to be reminding them that, hey, actually, this is exactly for people like you. And you do have a voice in the matter. And the way that you contribute into this ecosystem can really tip the scales in a meaningful capacity. I will also say that people right now are hurting across the state of Florida,
yes, they are.
Right? I was one of the statistics that has sat with me for so long throughout the entirety of this campaign has been the fact that 1 in 2 Floridians are one $1,000 emergency away from homelessness.
Yeah.
That's one traffic infraction, that is one health scare, that is one storm or hurricane that rolls through the state that could place these families, 50% of families across the state, into a deep state of despair. That is unacceptable. That is not freedom. That is fragility.
Absolutely.
And we need to be addressing that head on.
I completely agree. And I think, challenging the narrative, challenging conventional wisdom, I tell Democrats that all the time because we tend to repeat these talking points. And it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And to be courageous is to have that courage of your convictions and to believe, that what you think is the impossible is possible, especially at this moment. You brought something up, and I do want to just touch on it because I think it's important. Right now, the Democratic Party doesn't have a high favorability amongst U.S. citizens. Neither does the Republican Party, and I think that's something that we have to address. I think it's something we have to address. I've heard a lot of talk about third parties or people running as non-party affiliated as some kind of response to that. And I think a lot of us, as the chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party, I have a lot of disappointment, I would say, at national leadership. Mm-hmm. What do national Democrats need to do to provide a little bit more trust and belief that the Democratic Party can usher in a better life for American citizens and Florida?
Start by listening a little bit more, right? I think being more in tune with the needs of everyday American people and less preachy from the from your Iron Dome or from up above. You need to really be getting down with the people, understanding where they're coming from and meeting them where they're at. And I would argue that a majority of people in the state of Florida, at least, are coming at this from a place of a return to the basics. They want good education for their kids. They want to be able to access affordable healthcare that respects their time, their wallets, and their dignity. They want to be able to get access to a starter home and be able to plant a flag and build that anchor so that they too can participate in the promise of the American dream. And right now, so much of that feels so distant. And I would argue in 2024, one of the big missteps of the party was forgetting to meet people in that place, forgetting to meet people in that sticking point where they were finding themselves. And I think now we're seeing the party pay much closer attention to that critical stance of affordability and stability. We got to be returning to a place of affordability and stability for people across the state of Florida, and to be able to unlock the dream and the promise that was Florida. It was a dream and a promise for me and for my family. I mentioned that I'm a first-generation American. My parents immigrated into this country from Venezuela, and they came here with little more than faith, a grounding in hope that they can build a better life, and a lot of hard work. And in doing that, they were able to build a better life for themselves, for their community, for me and my siblings. And my dad's a Christian pastor, so we also very much had that at the forefront of, that's always been at the forefront of many decisions that I've made professionally. Even my decision to run was that those early lessons from my dad to always extend grace to people on the margins, to always remember to love your neighbor first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And for too long, we have seen that concept of loving your neighbor as a sign of weakness. That is not a sign of weakness. That's how you build community. Yeah. That is how you build nations. And we need to return to that place.
Absolutely. And, the idea of admitting that there were missteps, I think, is really important for the party to rebuild trust with the American people and for us to just do better. It's listening and also taking accountability.
That's right.
For things that were not done correctly or the best way possible, and we have to learn from that. And that's part of, I think that's part of listening and doing better, and that's what we're trying to do locally, and again, urging national electeds and party leaders to do the same.
And I think we're also in this interesting moment in time when leaders are being expected, politicians are being expected to stand by their values. And I think that's incredibly important. And there's a difference between values and ideology, right? I think ideology can be more dogmatic, but I think values is something that many of us can agree on, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, independent. There's some grounding values that we can all coalesce around, right? And how do we return to that place of anchoring ourselves to values, being unapologetic about those values, and then beginning to tease out how that translates into policy?
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I would always say is we have to put country over party.
That's right.
As much as I support the Democratic Party and I'm a Democrat, those are my values. I think what's most important is putting country over party, and that means putting community
That's right.
over party. We actually just saw this today. I'm not sure if you heard this, but the leading contender for the Republican nomination for governor in Minnesota dropped out of the race. He left the Republican Party because he decided to transcend party politics and support the people of his state. And I think that if we can see things like that happening, that shows that there is an impetus for us to unify and stand together about what really matters to us.
Listen, I think we started this conversation talking about acts of courage. I think that's also an act of courage, right? I think being able to stand out when you're in your in-group and you're going to say, hey guys, we're probably heading in the wrong direction. We're actually probably missing the mark, and take the courageous step to raise your hand and to speak up. I really respect that. And I'm actually, I've been in the cesspool of social media over this past weekend,
Same.
on the heels of the tragic shooting that happened once again in Minneapolis. And, one of the things when you're in that place, it's really easy to be overwhelmed with emotion, and it's really easy to go to a place of polarization. It's really easy to lose hope and trust in humanity and in our American neighbors. But then you see the points of light, right? And then you begin to see Republican leaders that are speaking up against the administration, an administration that, quite frankly, is lying to the American people.
Yes.
And trying to pretend like the facts that we can all see with our own two eyes are not what happened, right? This gentleman, Alex, he did not commit any crime beyond trying to exercise his constitutional rights of holding power accountable, and he was killed for that. And now we're here trying to drum up this whole story that he was a wannabe assassin coming out to attack ICE agents. It's insane. And Americans are not buying that story, by the way. They're not going to get gaslit into buying that either.
No, they're not. And because we can see it with our own eyes.
That's right.
And when the administration has a narrative that somehow this person wanted to do great harm to ICE officers, and there's absolutely zero evidence for that whatsoever, the American people are not stupid. They can see that. And I think a lot of the agitators online that create this chaos and discontent, I don't think that they're real people. I think that there's a lot of bots. And so I think I urge people not to lose hope when they see, oh, there's so many people making these terrible comments on posts or whatever else. It's understanding that those aren't necessarily real people. That's part of, you mentioned you were in the tech sector. So I know you understand that there's both foreign and local, actors that are trying to manipulate the conversation and act like there is more discord where there is not.
That's right.
Like you said, the American people are not buying it because we can see it. Alex Preddy was murdered on the streets of Minneapolis, and that is not a controversial statement. It is what we can see happen. And it's terrifying that the administration is saying something different.
That's right.
Also, I find myself, and when you talk about transcending party and really talking about values, I find it fascinating that now it's us who are talking about the Second Amendment.
That's right.
Right? That somebody has a right to be armed. When they have a right to be armed, and
they're doing so legally and lawfully. They're permitted. They have a concealed weapons permit, right? So they're following all the necessary common sense steps to be carrying a weapon. And still, now that's being used as a wedge issue to justify a murder.
Which means, right, that then you don't have a Second Amendment.
That's right.
And so what we're seeing is an erosion of all of our constitutional rights and a justification for why those constitutional rights should be eroded. And I think that when we say, it's very, fascinating to me that when we stand up for the Constitution, we're saying free speech matters, right? The right to protest, like you said, hold our leaders accountable, hold ICE accountable. That is our rights as U.S. citizens.
That's right.
To do so peacefully, to be able to have a weapon is our right under the law. Like you said, when you follow the law, and Alex Preddy followed the law, we can see with our own eyes that he was not reaching for a weapon. We saw with our own eyes that and I'm sorry to get, I don't want to derail us because this is going to segue into something else, but we saw one of the officers remove his weapon and only then was he shot.
Yeah.
And so when the administration takes a narrative that is contrary to what we can see, contrary to the facts, there is a point, there's a line in the sand where people say, no, yeah, I'm not buying this anymore. And if they're lying about this, what else are they lying about?
That's right.
And we can support law enforcement. In fact, we must support law enforcement. But what's happening in Minneapolis is not law enforcement.
And I think that's spot on, right? I think we have to resist the urge, the knee-jerk reaction to want to speak out against law enforcement, to want to speak out against immigration enforcement. I think any civilized society and nation has to have law and order. It has to have strong borders, and we need to be ensuring that that's the case. At the same time, any civilized nation needs to also follow their own constitution. And right now, we're trying to opt for one and not the other, right? And this is an issue that it's, I think, hitting fairly close to home for me. I look at someone like Renee Good. She was a 37-year-old woman, a mother. I look someone like Alex Preddy. He was 37 years old. I'm 37 years old. I feel like right now I have my whole life ahead of me. These two people had their whole lives ahead of them, and they were robbed of that opportunity for no crime other than following their constitutional right to hold truth to power.
And for being courageous.
That's right.
For being courageous.
That's right. I'm a father, and the last thing that I want is for my son to grow up in a country where he feels that at any given point in time, he could be accosted by masked agents who are not willing to identify themselves, who are not willing to follow due process, who are not willing to follow some of the basic safeguards that the Constitution guarantees its citizens, and for him to feel like he's going to have to now carry his passport around just to prove that he belongs. No, he belongs in this country. He's an American citizen. He was born in this country, and he has every claim to this nation as anyone else.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for people to know. I mean, this statistic was shocking to me, but there are 600 police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota. 600. And we're listening to the police chief himself. So we support law enforcement. He's obviously speaking truth to power as well. But when you have 600 police officers, and then you have 3,000 ICE agents masked, ununiformed in the streets doing these operations, where we saw a U.S. citizen taken from his home with no clothes on, with just a blanket covering him. For what? Why? That was a U.S. citizen. They went into his home. Our sanctity, our the basic, now we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, we're talking about the Fifth Amendment, we're talking about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. Our whole Constitution is under attack right now by this administration. And
there's no transparency or accountability, right? And I think right now there is an opportunity to be able to push for some accountability. There's a vote pending in the U.S. Senate. This bill already passed the House of Representatives, but there's a bill pending before the U.S. Senate right now on whether or not they're going to approve additional funding for ICE going forward. And I think this, if there's one power that Congress still retains in a world where they have given away a lot of the power to the executive branch, if there's one power they still retain, it's the power of the purse, right? Mm-hmm. And the power of allocating money. And what I think needs to be critical right now, and what I hope that everyone in the state of Florida is calling Rick Scott and Ashley Moody about right now, is for both of them to vote no on any measure that's going to be giving a blank check to the Department of Homeland Security. Because if the Department of Homeland Security has proven anything in the past 3 weeks of this year, is that they are not accountable, that they are not transparent, that they're not abiding by the U.S. Constitution. And Kristi Noem, quite frankly, needs to resign. She has lost all credibility in front of the American people. And we need to hold her accountable. We need to hold the puppeteer behind all this, the person with the master plan, which is Stephen Miller. Mm-hmm. He also needs to be held accountable. And we need to be making sure that our senators are going to be representing our voice in the U.S. Senate. And if they're not willing to, which I doubt either of them are going to vote down this budget, then we need to be replacing them immediately.
I completely agree. And in fact, we have a script on our social media, on our Instagram, where people can, and the phone number for which they can call their senators and make the statement. Like you said, it's probably unlikely that Rick Scott or Ashley Moody will have the same courage as this Republican in Minnesota, but that doesn't mean we don't try.
That's right.
We give them the opportunity to do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, like you said, we replace them. We show them that we want our elected representatives to represent us and to represent our values.
And if they're not going to push for accountability, we're going to hold them accountable in November.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Ashley Moody's record. Like why this race? Why was this so important for you to run now against this person?
Listen, I think one of the things that is abundantly clear to me is that Ashley Moody, she just hit her 1 year mark as a U.S. senator, an appointed senator, by the way. She was appointed to this seat after Marco Rubio stepped down to go wreak havoc in other capacities. But she has now been in that seat for a little bit over a year. And in that 1 year, what has she delivered for the people of Florida? She has taken away healthcare through the Affordable Care Act subsidies that she voted to remove for nearly 5 million Floridians. Mm-hmm. And in the process, she has empowered ICE and DHS to get an allotment of $170 billion. And that allotment is doing what? It's creating chaos in our streets. It is killing American citizens. It is abusing the civil rights and it's abusing the due process of immigrants all across this country with zero accountability and zero due process.
And the crazy part about this, there's a lot of craziness in this, but, the one thing people always say is do it the right way, right? People should do it the right way. But we've seen this administration now freeze benefit applications for 40 different countries, including Cuba and Venezuela. Right. So people who have pending naturalizations, people who are eligible to become U.S. citizens in this country from Cuba, Venezuela, and 38 other countries, all those applications are frozen. Also to become residents. So people who have spouses that have been, U.S. citizens and their spouses are not able to get their applications adjudicated or approved by the USCIS, that's the entity that grants applications, those are frozen. So they can't do it the right way. And then to put even more difficulty to doing it the right way, the Trump administration has frozen all immigrant visas coming out of 75 countries, including Cuba, Colombia, Guatemala. Venezuela is not on that list, but that hinders family reunification. How can you say do things the right way if you're going to prevent people from doing it the right way in the first place? So if somebody decided right now, who, let's say they were undocumented, and they decided to leave and do it, quote unquote, the right way, and have that petition to come back if they're able to. Most people do not have a path forward, but even for the people who may have a path forward, they won't be able to come back with these frozen visas. And I think that's why this accountability is so important, because there are many people have paths forward, even if they're in proceedings before the immigration court. But if we're just indiscriminately detaining people, that's not the right way.
One of my expectations for the new Congress that will be sworn in after the upcoming midterms is for them to take on comprehensive immigration reform. I think we are way overdue for a real hard look at the way that the laws in this nation around immigration are structured and how they need to be reformed to be reflective of the moment in time that we're living in. And to your point, I think this is not about legal or illegal. I think this is more so about repression and power and intimidation. And what we need to be doing in this moment in time is saying, hey, if this is really about legality, then let's take a hard look and let's address creating real, tangible pathways for a greater set of people that can come here and work hard. And by the way, this economy needs it. This economy benefits tremendously from having migrants in the country. So we need to be ensuring that that's going to continue to be the case.
Absolutely. One of the things I talk about often, I am an immigration lawyer, so it is, always present for me. But it's also, like you said, it's basic economics. When you are detaining and deporting 3,000 people a day, when people are afraid to go out of their homes, when people are afraid to work, when people are afraid to go to school, and we're seeing our school enrollment drop precipitously in the state of Florida because people are afraid to send their children to school. They're afraid to send their children to school. Then you lose not only that labor force, you lose the consumer base.
Right.
So you mentioned your parents are from Venezuela. I live in Doral. We're having a massive issue with a lack of spending in our community because people, and that harms businesses.
That's right.
That harms business owners. It harms the fabric of our community because when, going out, going to restaurants, we have lovely places to spend time in Doral, and we're seeing just less and less and less people being part of that because they're afraid. And that, to me, is truly sad that people are too afraid to go out and be part of the community.
And I think what's most important right now is for the American people to be able to hold the duality of encouraging and pushing for a strong border while also pushing for the dignified, humane, and constitutional treatment of every American citizen and every immigrant. Those two things are not at odds, and we need to be pushing and advocating for both.
Absolutely. And in 2024, there was a bipartisan bill that would have shorn up security on the border, and I supported that. And it would have raised the standard for asylum. Not all of my colleagues agreed with that, but I certainly did. And I think that is the correct approach for our countries to ensure, look, the numbers of immigrants that did come across the border in the years preceding was high, and people were alarmed, and I understand that. At the same time, some of the people who came across were people who were fleeing violent dictatorships. Yep. People who on July 11th stood up to their government in Cuba and then faced political persecution. Those are some of the people that came across. Yeah. People who were fighting for freedom, right? And were politically persecuted. At the same time, so we have to have an asylum process, but at the same time, we must have a secure border.
Absolutely.
And we have to ensure that our asylum process is one that is reflective of our values.
Yes.
And not taken advantage of.
That's right.
And we can hold both of those things at the same time, And
I think to some degree, and I'm all for, to your point, the importance of accountability and the accountability that the Democratic Party needs to face. I do think there have been some missteps on behalf of the Democratic Party. And when Democratic leadership has been at the White House, there have been some missteps around that sense of how do we do things right? How do we ensure that, hey, asylum claims that are being made are legitimate, right? There has to be a stronger process. That being said, we cannot now overcorrect and have what we're seeing right now happen within the Department of Homeland Security and within ICE, which is a free for all, right? It's they want to be able to go into homes without a warrant signed by a judge. They want to be able to wear masks and not have to show their ID and not have to show their badge number. Like, this is not how we do things constitutionally in the United States of America, and we need to rectify that. And I think this funding bill that's coming before the Senate is the perfect opportunity of putting some real constraints on that money. If that money is going to be allocated, it has to be allocated with some measures of transparency and accountability tied to it, and that is going to be critical for any vote that anyone should be casting in the U.S. Senate.
And I hope that the people listening will pay attention to what Ashley Moody does, what Rick Scott does. I hope they'll reach out, tell them what their values are, what they should be doing, and again, hold them accountable based upon this vote that's coming up.
That's right.
Right. Hector, this has been a great conversation. We could go on, I know, for another 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, so many issues. But if people wanted to learn more about your legislative priorities, learn more about your campaign, how to support your campaign both as volunteers and to contribute to your campaign, because statewide races are very expensive.
They're expensive.
Yep. And you know,
especially in Florida.
Absolutely. We have the highest media market here in Miami-Dade County. How can people find you, find more information about you, and support you?
Listen, the best way to be able to reach my campaign is through our website. It's hectormujica.com. Mujica's Mujica. And I'm deeply appreciative for the time. Thank you for giving me a platform to share more about my perspective. And thank you for all you do to make sure that we're building a more just and fair society here in South Florida.
Thank you. Well, I thank you for running, because that courage is exactly what's needed in this moment. So thank you. And I know it's not easy. I can't even imagine running for U.S. Senate. So we're all appreciative to have, you know, good candidates stand up, and may the best candidate win.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
That's right.
Bye.